How y'all doing today? We're here at PRI at the Aem Ev booth, and as you know, motorsports is changing, and everybody's doing these electric conversions. So you guys saw our. Let's take a look and see what the new technologies are coming out. And how you doing, Nathan?
I'm good. Ryan, how are you?
Good. So we have a lot of fans and people who know are starting to get into this conversion and using the Tesla motors, but having such a struggle of trying to control them and make them work right with temperatures and
everything
all this
else.
Craziness. Or even the ones that have Teslas themselves, you know, that want to do something beyond trying to hack the software and make it work and try to fake it and all those kind of things. And
Right.
I've seen, I'll show you guys a close up here of the board.
Questions?
They developed a whole control system.
Yeah, so this is what you're showing right here. So this is a Tesla large drive unit. And yeah, to kind of your point about the type of controls that were offered prior to the existence of this product, a lot of CAN spoofing, trying to trick the drive unit into still thinking it's in a Model S, making it still think it's in its comfortable little home that it's happy with, and certainly a good solution. It's a good way to get probably a vehicle up and running pretty quickly. It's actually not that difficult to capture the CAN, kind of see what's going on, regurgitate it back out. You can pretty well fake out the drive unit and make it think it's still in a Model S, but we've kind of come to realize that the final output of that is you really kind of have very little control over what you might want to do with the drive unit itself. Obviously, from Tesla, the drive unit, the torque delivery, and the level of regen has all been catered towards a Model S, which I don't know exactly how much a Model S weighs, but they're a pretty big, heavy car. And what we were hearing and feeling from feedback from users that adopted that type of control, a CAN spoof control, was like, well, my car is smaller, lighter, so I can't use 600 newton meters of torque or 450 newton meters of torque, whatever, if you're a base unit or a large drive unit, that I need to throttle that down. And there wasn't, you could have a power cap. Some of the systems out there did have a capability of having a power limit, but you still had just like an unusable amount of initial torque. So these cars are being smaller, lightweight, can't put that power to the ground. They're actually running slower, and needing to have a way of throttling that power level some way. And also hearing the same thing on regen. So the Model S, I've driven a Model S a bunch of times. The regen is like borderline sort of aggressive. It feels great in a Model S, but back to the smaller, lighter car example, we had talked to guys that were running the spoofer controls, and when they come off the pedal and go into a corner, that they were getting so much negative motoring torque or generating torque that they actually locked up their rear tires and spun out their car. So you have an ease of install and an ease of use and being able to get the thing to go, but then you have the problem of very limited adjustability or tunability. And if it gets to a point where you're actually have inherent vehicle control issues, like if you have too much braking torque that then causes vehicle control problems, it winds up not being a great solution. So early on, we kind of got a look of the offerings and kind of felt measured what are we up against? What could we do? We have our VCU product. We're going to be able to have control solutions that users could have and use, and we really couldn't hitch our wagon confidently to any one of those solutions. The CAN spoofers are good but limited. You get whatever Tesla gives you. There is the open source board solutions that from the UK that are okay. They use what's called a scalar control, which is a very basic type of motor control. And we decided that being kind of a very hobbyist level solution, and the CAN spoofing solution being very limited, that we felt like we had to come up with our own solution that basically gave us the keys to the kingdom, fully unlocked the inverters, gave us the full ability to tune it however we want, command torque controls, and introduce our own D rates and things like that, take control of the situation. Because in our background in motorsport and engine management tuning, for us, if we can't get in there and tune and calibrate a vehicle to be fully optimized, then we're not doing our job. So that was the genesis of why we had to come up with this control board. So we actually partnered with by far the most recognized experts in the performance inverter world, Cascadia, formerly Reinhardt Motion. So those guys out of the Pacific Northwest, we partner with them. So essentially what we've done is we've taken the Tesla power stage, the phasing, and unlocked it and turned it in essentially into a Cascadia inverter. So we did spend quite a bit of time validating this system. Primarily Cascadia, and a lot of stuff you see in motorsports is all permanent magnet based, and these being AC induction motors. AC induction motor control is actually a pretty involved and complex process. This does use field oriented control, vector control, and we logged well over 1,000 dyno runs getting this system fully tuned, characterized, and calibrated. Not only getting the inverter controls kind of dialed away, but also finding the inductance curve of the motor, getting all the gain controls working correctly, and maximizing torque and power per amp and per volt. So,
what kind of horsepower levels, temperatures? How does all this kind of play into this a little bit?
Sure. So to talk about power levels a little bit, when we baseline a stock Model S so this is a base drive unit. Base Model S base drive unit made roughly 450 newton meters of motor torque, rotor torque, and about 250 kilowatts of power, wheel power. So that set the bar for us. That's what we needed to achieve. And we were able to make an additional 25 newton meters of motor torque. So we're making about 475, 480 newton meters of torque. And what's nice about being able to unlock our system, the induction motors respond really well to a higher power capacity battery, something like a power cell versus an energy cell. So we've been able to make easily 300 kilowatts of power, and then if you have a very high discharge capable battery, we've actually made up to 350 kilowatts of power with a base drive unit. So we're talking about 100 kilowatt gain over stock levels, which is huge. It's huge. It's like almost whatever, maybe a 40% gain of power. So it's pretty fantastic what you can actually unlock. And just like in the OEM ICE world, out of the factory, the car companies are leaving a little bit on the table so the tuners can take advantage of that. And that exact same thing was true for Tesla, that they're not running them at 100%, but by putting our controls on there, we can actually tap into them, get that 100% power out of them, make a little more than they're actually rated for. With the base drive unit, there actually was some headroom to allow a little more current into the motor. So we on the DC side, we observed that the motors typically ran to maybe 900, 950 amps DC. When we turn these up and really crank on them, we're making just under 1100 amps DC. So we're a little more aggressive on the flux control of the rotor. We're hitting it off pretty hard and pretty early, and then we're putting a little more current through the stator for our torque current and making that power. So, and that's how we managed to net those power gains over OEM levels. So
can you maintain that 100%? How keep coming to factor with that?
Yes, to a point. So
if they're drag racing or road racing.
Shorter duration use is really good because it's interesting. We learned that the motors, the stators themselves, when you're putting 1,000 amps of DC through the inverter and then into the stator, it does get incredibly hot. And most the information out there we found indicates that the stators are good to about 170 C. The rotors, which are liquid cooled, those have a temperature limit as well. The phases, we got to keep the transistors around 70 C. So we have temperature inputs for all of these points on the motor. We also internally can keep track of the coolant temperature in and out before and after the inverter cooling loop. So keeping track of all of that, we actually hard-coded in a certain level of temperature derate thresholds that are hard-coded in the inverter control, and then in the VCU, we have the ability to do derates based on, if you have a limited cooling system on a vehicle, you could derate that down a little bit more. But now we found with the base drive unit, because they kind of run at, I would say, like 80-85% real capacity, when we turn them up to like a 95-100% capacity, it certainly stays within a very reasonable range of temperature. We can run them pretty hard. In fact, I ran them we were overheating and overrunning our dyno before we were overrunning this. And, with a good pump with a lot of cooling, flow, volume, and a big radiator, if you can get the heat out of the drive unit, then it'll allow you to kind of keep making that power.
So what's the difference between an S, where they run 2 of these, for example, and a new Plaid that's out now? They're running with 3 motors now?
Sure,
right?
yeah. So we can talk about the different models. So this being a base drive unit, this would come out of your typical S car. So that's going to be let's say in 2012 to maybe I think as late as 2014 or 2016, that was the standard Model S 60 or 80 or I think it might have been a 70 for a little while, but that was your standard Model S, came with this base drive unit. Then the P cars, the performance cars, get introduced, and those have a sport drive unit. So the sport drive unit does up to 600 newton meters of torque. The base does 450. I think they might do, the base does 250 kilowatts. I have a feeling the sport might do somewhere around the 300 kilowatt range. So the P cars, for a little while early on, like in 2012, they had a P85 car. So that was a sport drive unit, rear-wheel drive only, two-wheel drive. And then I think around 2013 or 2014, they went to the D cars, which are dual drive. So they had a large drive unit in the back. And if you had a performance D car, so like a P85D or a P90D, or now or until recently a P100D, that was a performance drive unit in back, and then what we're calling a small drive unit in front. So about 300 kilowatts in the back, and I believe the front does a little over 200 kilowatts. So it's a smaller motor. We're seeing that those are going to be really favorable for smaller cars, import cars, Hondas, front-wheel drive applications, stuff like that, or any kind of smaller, lightweight rear-wheel drive cars. The new Plaid cars, what they've done on that is essentially what they're doing is they're taking the Model 3 powertrain. Everything in the Model S was induction motors. And I think a lot of that, my theory, a lot of that comes from the fact that their relationship with a group, I think they were called AC Propulsion, can't remember. But anyways, their original Roadster, which contractually was designed through this group, they were very much AC motor guys, AC induction motors. So I have a theory that's why Model S's started as AC induction. When they went to Model 3, they shifted to permanent magnet. So now they've gone to the generation of the Plaid cars, and how they have 3 motors, what they're doing is essentially at the front of the car is a Model 3 permanent magnet motor, and then at the back of the car, it's really interesting, they have what effectively is 2 mirror image Model 3 motors bolted together. And so they have a motor and inverter on one side, and then on the other side they have another motor inverter, and they're literally bolted together. And it's not a common output drive, they're actually independent. So one motor drives the left wheel and the other motor drives the right, and that allows them to do some torque vectoring and everything else. So all combined, they've got roughly 1,000 horsepower worth of power between those 3 motors.
So if we were to have something like drag racing, for example, they can help kind of control the wheels and keep the car a little straighter at certain points with tuning and things like that.
So I'm sure on a straight path, they're doing what they can to keep the torque left to right as equal as they can to not induce any kind of unwanted torque steer. And then obviously when you get into a specific turning event, whether it's road course or even just driving on the freeway or the street, I'm sure they're doing a little bit of a bias in order to get the car to pivot. So they'll bias torque from one side to the other to facilitate that.
So some of the guys who maybe not understand the kilowatts and things like that. How about related to maybe dumb it down to like horsepower?
Well,
give me an example. What are these capable of versus the Plaid more? I know they're smaller.
That's a great question, and I have to apologize that everything we do, especially in the inverter control world, is so base and metric stuff that I can't answer that question. So hopefully you can do a little editing after the words and say, Nate didn't know what he was talking about. Here's the equation to go from kilowatts to horsepower and from newton meters to torque. I will say I know that the 450 newton meters is roughly 300 foot-pounds of torque, I think. And the 300 kilowatts of power is roughly 400 horsepower. Okay. I've kind of remembered that one, but the relationship to the other motors I don't quite remember. So
the running front and back of these are getting like 1,000, 1,200 roughly, just kind of being just general.
Right, yeah, because what you could do with our control, what's kind of nice is, so I will say right off the bat, we're definitely taking drive units out of Teslas, out of Model S's, and putting them in other things. The level of complexity to try to bring like an unlocked standalone control and try to put that into a Tesla the amount of integration and can control networks and systems on the car it would blow your mind. There's so many things going on in that car that to try to support an OEM level type of integration would, for all intents and purposes, is basically impossible. So what that means is you're taking a really high power density drive unit. It's a great power solution. They're affordable, they're plentiful, they're in wrecking yards across the country. You can take that out and put it in whatever car you want, and then you can kind of harness and take advantage of that Tesla engineering and that power. And what's cool is, any Model S, you've got a large drive unit in the back, small drive unit in the front. Now that we've got our standalone controls, you can actually take a pair or multiple. Our VCU 300 can literally run 4 inverter motor combos. So you could technically somehow, through some mechanical wizardry, put 4 of these on a vehicle and run them if you had the battery to support it. But we would have the control electronics to control it.
Wow, that'd be insane.
That would be insane. I'm thinking that's something we might need to try doing. So
I like that idea.
I like that idea because it was like, wow, 2 is a lot. 2 is nuts. 4 would be insane.
Definitely.
Yeah.
If you get the car fraction.
Right.
So I saw you guys in the video over there. You guys had done this is Mustang, I believe, right?
Correct. Yeah. So we, I guess that would have been towards the end of 2019 and into 2020. Ford approached us to help them do the Cobra Jet program. So the Cobra Jet program, the E-Cobra Jet is a pair of dual stack Cascadia motors, which we have on the table displayed over there. So each one of those dual stacks is it's a 300-pound package that can do up to 900 horsepower, and that car has 2 of them together in parallel.
Can we take a walk over there?
Yeah, let's go take a look. Yeah, so going back to the Cascadia Motion Group, so Cascadia is kind of a conglomeration of BorgWarner OEM, as well as Reinhardt Motion, who did the inverter solutions, and then a group called Aem Racing. And so Aem Racing was responsible for the really nice high-end billet motor enclosures. Inside of this is what were formerly Remy, but are now BorgWarner, what's called an HVH motor insert or cartridge. So there's a pair of those inside of here, and then it's in this beautiful high-end motorsports enclosure. So 300 pounds. When you drive this at 800 volts, it'll make about 900 horsepower. And then, so now that we talked about the bits and pieces of what Cascadia does, so we have all the control electronics, and then for the Ford project, they took a pair of these motors, which are essentially four motors combined in 2 housings, 4 separate inverters, and they put that all together in the Cobra Jet, which you can kind of see in the background there. So that's a combined power of 1,400 horsepower. Car runs low 8s, incredibly fast, for a door slammer. It's actually faster than the gas equivalent Cobra Jets, which is kind of fun. And yeah, so we provided the controls solution on that. And what's kind of unique about that car is most EVs that we hear about and know about are commonly direct drive. So that means is there's some kind of gear reduction on the motor. If you need to go, you turn the motor on and you provide torque. If you need to stop, you turn the motor off and come to a stop. There's no idling of the motor, there's no startup or whatever the case may be. With that car, because they needed it to be a very specific kind of drag race chassis that's really dialed in and kind of like a known entity, they chose to use the standard Turbo Hydro 400 transmission. So that's something that needs to be shifted. It does have a torque converter. So we created a motor control solution in our VCU that literally allows you to push a button, the motors start up and idle in order to have the torque converter and the transmission pumping and working. And there's plenty of video running around on the internet that shows that car idling and running. And what they do is when they go to launch it, they actually put it on a 2-step. Just like you would in a normal gas engine. They put it on a 2-step, they launch it, and the thing actually makes a lot of noise. It's all straight cut gears. It's really fun to listen to, so it provides kind of that audible, sensation that you might think would be missing out with an EV is totally present with that car. So it's really fun to watch. Does big wheelies. They hang the tires out, well past the 100-foot mark, and then run it down the course at 8s, which is incredible.
And that's only with 2 of those motors?
With 2 of those dual stack motors, so effectively 4 motors.
Oh, so they did get 4.
Yeah, and they control that with the Aem VCU 300.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming by. Thanks.